great job getting us set up. This is our second session of the series on Christian nationalism. And I had handouts from Christianity Today on what is Christian nationalism, but not enough for last week. So if you didn't get last week's handout, yeah, and there are more where those came from. And then we have a handout today that Joe read an article in the New York Times and thought it would contribute to the discussion. So before Joe begins her presentation, we're going to highlight Raven and Amy Agape, who are in Texas, who are giving some learnings from a podcast called Hidden Brain about listening to one another, because that's kind of our focus today. And then I'm going to introduce Joe. But Mike, if you could highlight Raven and Amy.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Hi, friends. Good morning. We're happy to be here with you today. We are in Texas, and just this morning we took a walk in the neighborhood where we're staying, and we saw a lot of signs that are appropriate for our talk today. So feeling a little full right now. So I listened to the podcast Hidden Brain a lot. I don't know if some of you are familiar with it. It is a podcast that is hosted by a wonderful gentleman named Shankar Vedantam, and he does all kinds of interviewing of specialists who highlight ways that we are thinking that affect us that we don't know that we're thinking, right? Our subconscious, our unconscious. And they did a series earlier this year called Us 2.0 or US 2.0, both I think was their intention. And it was all about the divisive nature of discourse in our country right now. And I went through the transcripts of it, and I highlighted some of the data, because literally one of the times when I was listening to one of these episodes, I stopped. I was in a parking lot driving, and I just stopped my car because what I heard was so overwhelming. I think this will give us a good background to move into Joe's incredible gifts that she'll share with us today. So here are the pieces that really gripped me. One is we, and this is all of us on either side, in the middle, whatever. We think our opponents are stupid, that they do not appreciate what is best for themselves or the country. In contrast, we think that we and others who agree with us are smart and are always doing and voting in ways that are best for ourselves and the country. So we elevate our own intellect and denigrate the people who disagree with us. We think that we're thoughtful and rational, and that our opponents are always being tricked by the media and or a leader. Two, we severely overestimate how much the other side dislikes us. In one study, the researchers show that we inflate our estimates of how much the other side dislikes us by somewhere between 50 to 300%. So when I'm talking to somebody, if I'm assuming that they hate me, I'm going to act a certain way. And what they found is I'm inflating their dislike of me by 300%, up to 300%. A team of scientists has found that although people generally support democracy, almost everyone they interviewed supported democracy, we vastly overinflate how much people on the other side don't want to support democracy. So we think they don't like us, we think they're stupid, and we think they're not for the same thing as we are, our country. People vastly overestimate how much those on the other side see obvious moral wrongs, such as child pornography and embezzlement, as acceptable. The study showed that both Democrats and Republicans thought that 15%, at least 15% of the other side viewed child pornography as acceptable. Even though obviously when they were asked, none of these people viewed it as acceptable, but they thought their opponents might. And lastly, when we think about the motivations of others, we think that they are aggressive. Our opponents are aggressive. We think that they're trying to destroy us. We think that they're motivated by some deep instinct to hurt us. But the literature suggests that ultimately people are motivated by the desire to protect themselves, to guard against threats. They're motivated by a sense of vulnerability, and they're just trying to protect themselves and their vulnerabilities, which I think Joe will really highlight for us too. So I thought this was helpful. If you're interested in listening to any of those podcasts, just let me know and I can send you those links.
Thank you, Amy. And I wanted to just share a little bit about Jo. She's going to share a lot with us, but she's been working with chaotic systems now for 45 years. She's a trained therapist, worked in the Bronx for many years. She was part of the only interracial team that taught at NYU in the School of Social Work on chaos, and has written a book recently, which she has back here. You might want to take a look at The Whole Elephant. So she is a listener and very aware of how chaotic systems play into what we're experiencing today. And so we're just looking forward to what you have to share with us. Thank you, Jo, for being here.
Thank you. Happy Mother's Day to all mothers in the room. As usual, I'd like to say hello to my colleague of 35 years and co-writer of the memoir, Judy Kernsey, is up there. You can highlight her. She was right under Lord.
Oh, there we
That's
go.
it. Hi, Judy. And Judy, you're right. It's nothing. What I'm doing is not quite what we thought I would do. And she is there because she knows that always happens. I would start off with my background, how I started. I came from a family at the top end of the social spectrum. We lived in the kind of luxury mostly you only see in films. And being the oppositional sort that I am, I never stayed in my box. But the worst strain I did was to go to work in the South Bronx when the NYPD told my family, don't let her go, there are places there we're afraid to go. So of course I went. And I had my driver take me the first time, because I'd never been in the Bronx. And he dropped me off 2 blocks from the hospital. And I walked, and I told him, keep circling till I come out. And when I walked in, it was this huge tundra, and there were children, Black and Latino children, dancing and singing. As soon as I walked in the door, it's like somebody yelled, freeze. And they all stared. I asked where mental health was, and they told me it was upstairs. I went, I spoke to the receptionist. She said, have a seat, Myrtle will be right with you. And I sat down, and a man wearing a dress came and sat next to me and whispered in my ear in Spanish that he was a Russian spy. So this was my beginning. And I was to be interviewed after that, and Myrtle, who became, and is very much a part of the memoir, African-American woman, was determined that they would not allow me to come there. We don't need any board ladies here. I looked at her stationery where she lives, and this is not going to work out for us. So she hid the resume in the bottom drawer. And after 2 months, the head of psychiatry insisted she had to interview. So to be honest, she brought along her friend, a Puerto Rican, who was checking my Spanish, and I think both secretly hoping that I would just stumble all over, which I did not do. It was a great interview. I was excited. And my first day was a full moon in September. And I walked in and said, chaos you have never seen. And Myrtle came over and she said, I hate to do this to you. Hold on to your belongings. I can't take you to your office. And the woman screaming over there in Spanish and pulling her hair out needs to be assessed. Well, I felt a little hard. I went over there and I did, and I got her medicated. And then I thought, oh, I got to get in the book. So I went over and looked through a phone book. And the receptionist said to me, what are you looking for? And I told her. She said, nobody's in that book. It was the biggest borough and the smallest phone book. She'll never appear in it. So don't worry, she'll be back. So that was my first day. And then I was in the crisis unit. So that meant anybody from anywhere in the Bronx could just walk in, and they all were armed, which is a question of what they carried or wore. And we were told not to worry, that we had panic buttons at every desk. Well, I was there about 6 months and I found out we never hooked them up.
Oh.
But we didn't need it. Before I tell you some of the rest, we had the lowest assault rate of any mental health facility in the entire country, 0. We had no guards standing there, no fencing or anything to keep people out, no checking for weapons, but we were responsive to the community. And in terms of listening, one of the first things Myrtle said to me, do not think for 1 minute that what's wrong with these people is that they're not like you. So I knew I was in a whole vastly different world. And I knew mainly when I went to work, I'd be speaking Spanish pretty exclusively, because in the hospitals around that area, to get an appointment, if you were Spanish speaking only, took it up to a year. And then there was the guy who was turned away from, I think, Lincoln Hospital, and with a machete was going after people because he couldn't get seen. This program was written up nationally in the Family Therapy Network with a couple of which is over there. And at the end of 1987, maybe, our program was folded. We could not beat people away from the door, there were so many. And so we were disgusted. And what happened was the funding went back to what doesn't work. And 2 years later, when I went there, the halls were silent, the phones weren't ringing, nobody there. So we asked ourselves, and since we were systems thinkers, and I'll say a little more about that in a minute, what happened? And what happened is you could get, and anybody who's in education, I'm sure, has known that there were programs in education, the same thing happened. And we were caught in a paradoxical bind. If you did what the rules and regulations required, you would lose your job. You would keep your job but be ineffective. If you did what would work, you'd lose your job, which is part of what happened for the program. All the rules and regulations that come down through the healthcare system required what didn't work. And I'll give you my example why I'm out of here. I had one family with 26 people. And they came through when the accreditation people came through after our 10-year program. They said you had to have a chart for everyone. Really? And it's ridiculous. We were, family therapy clinic. But that's what was required. Now I'm going to, as I talk about systems, I'm going to pass out what led to this diagram after we left. And if you look in the small print on the very left of this first part, don't turn it over till I It says this is 1989. And when I left the South Bronx, I recognized that they were the earthquake fault, and it was coming to the rest of us, which is why I'm here today. I don't ever go where there isn't a disaster, but there's a disaster brewing that I think you all intuit that is coming to the rest of us. And whites are a particularly disadvantaged. We are conflict averse. We will do everything. We dot our I's, cross our T's, make sure our data is perfect. And if we're meeting and we think somebody might be contentious, we have a meeting before the meeting, so nothing comes up. And what is happening is that these other cultures that have pulled away are very good at conflict. They're articulate. And in the work that Merle and I did, and with Judy at Connecticut College, you could see that so clearly in the students of color, and then our white students, and how afraid they were of making a mistake or insulting people. So has everybody got a copy of this wonderful picture?
Somebody not supposed to see.
Only one side is supposed
Which one, of the old paradigm is what we're supposed to be looking at?
Yeah.
The old paradigm.
Because I wanted to talk to what happened. We saw that and knew that it was coming for the rest of us. And so we began looking at what was happening. And when we worked with corporations and banks and different places, we found that people were increasingly pitted against each other, whether it was gay, straight, black, white, rich, poor, and they're blaming them for everything not working. Anybody different from yourself is wrong. They're the ones why things aren't working. And so this is where we are in terms of polarization. And the white middle class and above is the last to get the message, because basically society's worked for us, pretty much, and not now. And so I am here because I'm worried about all of you. Because this is what we face. And so I will be available to anybody who gets stressed. Anytime you see me crawling around anywhere, just stop me. There's no question too nasty or too stupid. If you think stupid, which I don't, you can ask me at any time. Now, let me, again, we're talking about how do you dialogue across these differences. You have to understand things very differently, and I think this relates somewhat to what Amy was talking about. What I have done, and I'll give you a lot of examples from that, of my work, is looking at it, at what people present very differently. There is no formula for this. You have to hang with the people that you care about and who you might talk to about these things. How many of you have family members who have drastically different views from your own? Oh my goodness. That's a lot of folks. Okay, that's why I say I'm always available. And I love this. I mean, I came from a chaotic system and I have done nothing but work in that. I love my crazy families, as chaotic as they can get. And I don't see blame as a factor. Depending on the context, all behavior makes sense. And I think I might start first with, well, I'll start with, in the crisis room, a mother, Hispanic mother came in with her two little girls. And the male therapist who was on my team came to me. He said, "You better go talk to her. I'm going to kill her." Apparently, her boyfriend was just about to get out of jail, where he was serving time for sexually abusing her two little girls. And she kept insisting he didn't do it. So I went in and I said, "Senora, it seems like a lot of people are getting a lot of difficulty here. But let's suppose the courts were right, that they were abused by the boyfriend, without even taking a breath. I'd kill myself. I was sexually abused growing up." So we could scream at this woman until the cows came home. Is that a good trade-off? Or should we respect that she had to be helped so she could know what she needed to know? So then I will go to Ham. It's the only white and Jewish guy, probably within miles of where he lived. People were getting shot every day on his block. He was diagnosed after World War II as schizophrenic. He looked kind of unruly because he would go at 4 o'clock in the morning with his dog, picking things out of the trash to make his library. And he would come to the clinic, would always be on time, which never happened with anybody else. And he would stay the full time, and he would only talk through his dog. So nobody wanted him. They just like, he makes me crazy. So I took the ones that nobody else wanted. So I wanted to secretly really do something. And so for a year, I knew he slept with his dog, he ate with his dog, he did everything with his dog. So all the things I needed to say him about himself was a message about his dog. At the end of the year, he said, well, I guess I don't need to talk to my dog anymore. And then we worked with him, helped him get his driver's license. And he said at 60, he had his first success. And then we helped him move up to Orange County, New York, in public housing. And we did it by inviting him and his dog for a weekend to visit. And he sweated bullets all the way through the trip, but he did it. And I will show you what he gave to Myrtle and to me that he painted. He was not schizophrenic. He was treated as a schizophrenic for 40 years. So another situation was one I called, now this is going to have a point to it, obviously. I'm showing you a different way to look at people that is a little easier than your relatives. Okay, this case I called A Good Mother, Loyal Daughter. And it's a case that came to me in a different hospital on Long Island, and it was the first or second month of my first internship at NYU. But I had been at the Ackerman Institute for Family Therapy before. And I was in central intake, I got the call, and a woman with a very thick Italian accent and a speech impediment called to have her 26-year-old daughter hospitalized for the 10th time in 8 years. So I did what we always did. I went and I looked at the file drawer. The file drawer was at least as long as this. It was all her, just in that one drawer. I thought, this is kind of ridiculous. Maybe they should try a hotel. And so I went to my supervisor and I told her what I thought. And this was the mother's favorite hospital. And so I said to the supervisor, I would love to be able to say that we will not hospitalize her daughter unless the whole family comes in. And so they came. And Elizabeth worked with me. We sat together and we did what became a pattern. Sat with the family for 40 minutes and we came out and consulted. And so I said to Elizabeth, who's the identified patient? She looked at me, she said, not the one we've been hospitalizing all the time. The father looked like he had some kind of organic brain problem, and he worked the night shift at the bakery. And he would go home and go to sleep. Meanwhile, the mother, and Long Island has a lot of Italians, she was not connected to her own group at all. And so the daughter would be sitting in her room, and her mother would bring her food 3 or 4 times a day. And the daughter would proceed to get drunk when she had enough of her mother. And so we worked for a year, at least I stayed longer with this family and the supervisor. And at the end of a year and a half, the daughter was out to become a drug and alcohol counselor in another state. And I drove the parents to Kennedy Airport to go home to Italy for the first time in 35 years. So it ended very nicely. In terms of violence too, I'll give you an example here, something I call the bullet man. And this is a guy who was 6'5", covered in leather, jacket, pants, and bullets tucked in both of them. And he was mad. He was screaming and yelling. He said, they threw me out of 2 hospitals, told me to go OD on Thorazine. And meanwhile, of course, I was the head of the crisis unit, so everybody looks at me. Help yourself. So I took him down to my office and sat him opposite me. And I looked right at him, as close as Kathleen is to me. And I said, I don't know what you're here for, but if you want help, you're scaring the shit out of everybody. He started to sob like he wouldn't believe. His 21-year-old girlfriend was dying of cancer, and he was going to jail the next day. He called me every day from jail, and I told him to watch out for his girlfriend. So when we think of the Christian nationalists, what do many young white men do? They band together and they're angry. And that's why I would say too, and when we're talking about, we can easily get sidetracked by whatever scares us or captures us, like Christian nationalism. And it violates what you feel about your religion and your beliefs and your incensed. But there's a reason why, and I can say this after working only with chaos for 45 years, I mean, living it before that. I have never known people to come together and generate the mess that we see in families across the country now because they thought it was a good idea. They can't help it. And if they come from families that can't communicate, it comes right down the list. Now, for us, you know, when you think of things like violence, incest, all kinds of different positions, it's counterintuitive to think that you could ignore it. But I think you will be surprised at the results. And I'll give you one, are you following me with these examples, how to think differently?
Did you say give a hearing? It's important to listen.
Yeah. But it's more than that. I would be dead if I couldn't respectfully listen. And I mean, all the way through your being, not where you think like this, restricted out of here. They will pick it up in a heartbeat if they're stressed. And so it has to be that you learn an understanding, which I hope I'm giving you some kind of an idea about, so that you can do that. You know, the version too in poor communities to the Christian nationalists are the gangs. What do they do when they're scared? They come together. So I'd like to give an example though from, it relates probably closer to some of the things you might be worried about with family and whatnot. Just before I came out here, I was in a nail salon. It was a miserable East Coast wintry sort of day. And I had a pedicure drying my toes under one of those stupid machines they have. And there's a woman sitting like right here with her back to me, having her nails done. And she's talking about Trump. She's going on and on about Trump. And I thought, I could keep my mouth shut, which is a tall order sometimes, or I could say something. And I said to her, you know, I said, I don't agree with you. What do you mean you don't agree with me? I said, I don't. And so that began a very lengthy conversation. She wouldn't let me go. She kept me for 3 hours, hanging on my car door when I had to get home. And what her last comment was, I think is important. She said, everything you said to me makes sense, and I believe. But when I go home, my husband won't accept me, my family won't accept me, and neither will my friends and neighbors. Which was also a dilemma for David Brooks, the columnist for the New York Times, when he basically left the Republican Party as it became MAGA. He was also getting a divorce from his wife. He had no friends. He lost everybody that had been connected to him over all the years. So this is the kind of thing that we deal with, and I think in your family, where do these family members go? So that's it. Those are the examples. I've shortened everything because normally if I were to give a talk like this, it's 3 hours or a real long course. So I have been struggling all for the last 2 weeks, or what the hell am I doing? So let me just say that if you want to know more about systems and how to think about it, the one thing you need to know above and beyond everything else is the old paradigm is definitively over. I have been teaching and tracking this since the late 80s. And if you turn over that old paradigm, this is why it's important to communicate. This is what we will have to negotiate. Look at what's at the center. What's been left out of the entire industrial era. So we have to build a world. And so everybody has a piece of the elephant. And it's very important we listen to their piece. And any of the work we have done, be sure to put this out. We want liberals and we want conservatives. No way do you have just one or the other, even in a family, without being totally dysfunctional. Because the conservatives know what is a value that we need to keep. And the liberals are already, including myself, and that running off fast to do something. Forgetting all about, and this is what I think happened to Gorbachev. He was a very good systems thinker, and he had built this model. He's ready to take them on the capitalist route, but he forgot about the conservatives. And they snagged him, and that would happen in any program, and it's right, that should happen. So that's again, part of the paying attention. Now, why am I here? Somebody who's been away from the church for 68 years. Because as I have come to know, the most important thing that we have some power over is hopefully ourselves and our families first. Our values and where have they come from? I mean, I joked a little bit about with Felicia about the fact that I have lived the values that I had the first 15 years in church and choir and carrying the cross, even though I hadn't stepped foot in. I believe that the faith institutions are a critical piece. Families, the faith institutions, and our communities. All hell is going to break loose very shortly, dangerously so, and we can't stop that. But what we can do is to begin to build what comes next. And I believe this is a community that can do that. And I would say my friend Doris, Bonnie, you're reminding me of Doris. Bonnie and her husband, we were out to dinner, insisted, oh, come. I said, are you kidding? Why do I need that? Just come for us, just try it. And so they brought me to Trinity first. But then I met Felicia. I thought, maybe I did wrong. I shook her hand firmly and I looked right in her eyes. I thought, she's okay. She's present, she shows up. So we are going to have this enormous task. And the good news is that all across the globe is the same problem. And it will not be top down. So if you see somebody, whoever it is, telling you top down, this is what we're going to do, it never happens at this point. It will go community by community. And one thing about complexity and chaos, we go not to precision, which is the analytic and Tony paradigm, but to the complexity and chaos paradigm, which is perfect for living systems. And I'll repeat what I said before, there is no formula. You must know the context. And the pattern is in all complicated systems, complexity, chaos, from the individual to the globe is exactly the same. It's rigid, it's intractable, polarizing, it's Gaza and Israel. And when they're all through, they're still gonna have the same problem they couldn't solve before they slaughtered everybody. Hopefully, at least if we go community by community, we can begin to build structures that will work. It'll be the same structure. The details are like clothing, you know, will be the color of the community and whatever their values, other than the basic values that we probably all share. And having worked with rich, poor, black, white, Muslim, gay, straight, trans, everything, I have not seen where the values, real deep values, diverge. They're very similar. So remember, normally we look for a list of this is what you do. If you're doing that, you're ignoring the person. And I'll be even more outrageous and say, I can't stand diagnostic categories in mental health because it's a judgment, and then you treat the judgment. Know the person, and then you'll know what to do and know the context. And I would end with one of my favorite Bonhoeffer quotes. which links with what I've been telling you and Amy to what Florida will be talking about next week. We must learn to regard people less in the light of what they do or omit to do, and more in the light of what they suffer. And there isn't anybody who isn't suffering now. It's a question of degree. And I would say that my poor people in the Bronx, who I love and respect, they have more resilience than the middle class folk. They are extraordinary. But we can learn from that, and we can help one another. It will work. Because if it didn't, I wouldn't still be working because I'm not that dumb. So, questions?
So I think, kind of in the abstract, that what you're talking about is this chaos, and no matter what would happen to the government or the changes or whatever, if you're able to work community by community as allowed, there will be structures that can be built that will work.
Easily. I mean, this is not, the patterns are what we look at. The pattern is the same. And so it's how you talk to people to develop this. And I would also say that for absolutely everything that's broken, there are people like me who've been out there for decades working with what works. So the part of the collapse is the press is making a lot of money off hate and division over everything. But that does not mean that's what we're all about at all.
Can I follow up on that question? Well, first of all, thank you. I feel so hopeful listening to you, and just thank you for your work.
I am hopeful, by the way.
Yeah. So my question is the size of the community, and just a tiny example, right now in Fort Collins, a lot of distress in families because the school system is consolidating schools and which one are going to shut down. And the middle school near our house is scheduled to be closed. And I was talking to Florian about this yesterday, and he said, if I could just take that school, like I know even with that small number of students, we can have a beautiful, rich educational experience. So he felt like, just give me that community and we can figure it out. But we were talking about how big the school district is. It covers East and West Fort Collins and little communities that are getting swallowed up. It's huge. So if you look at the whole school system, they need to do something to make their finances work and the building costs. They don't have the same flexibility as someone who's just. So what size of community do you see the solutions happening at? Is there like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it could be any size. You start obviously small and then you begin to expand. I remember we did in Warwick, New York, Community 2000, which we picked up on the Community 2000 from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And it was really amazing. Everybody turned out, they put up on the board what they needed to see happen and what their values were and all of that kind of thing. And we got the farm preservation program out of that, among many other things. So it can be small, and if you want, we can talk about how to look at that, because I was talking to somebody who's doing something innovative in terms of education, and everything seemed to be going well, but then asking about the school administration, the overarching is the issue that we had at Marseille. The funding programs, and don't look for the mean people. It's not about that. The funding programs come in and they want what they know, but that can't work anymore. And that's what generates more polarization. And you have to look at what works and how do you get more of it. That's, you know, when my first week in the crisis room, and I realized this whole body of knowledge I had was some kind of sick joke. You're supposed to partialize and, you know, in the person and what's the most important one. Anybody who came in could kill themselves or could be killed. So what do I choose? You know, and that's where when everything's broken, if you focus on what works, it's amazing what happens. People were excited that they realized as bad and ugly as everything was, they could make a difference in their own lives. Now, I have an example here too of a university, but I don't want to take up time doing it now, that we worked with. Unless people think that's important.
I think it is important. Elaine, is the community this church? I mean, when I think of the community outside of the church.
Well, you start with this community. All right, I'm gonna stay on track with this to give you an idea. Okay, Myrtle and I were called into a university and interviewed by 30 people. Now, of course, if they called an interracial team of women, that was the liberal group. And they presented what was going on in the university, where they were afraid people were going to be murdered and or the university would fold. And so they wanted us to work with them, but they didn't want the conservatives there. We said, if you don't have the conservatives there, you need a different group. We want them there because they know something you don't. So violence had begun to happen and the campus was polarized. Racial tensions were high. One man from another country who had dark skin was being scapegoated. Myrtle and I worked with a diverse group of 200 faculty, staff, and administrators, teaching them how to think differently. We got their heads above the details to look at the big picture. And they discovered that with their university structure, groups on campus couldn't share information. They were all separate. When the institution was under heavy stress and funding from exterior sources was getting to be a problem, it easily got polarized. And people were bringing in a black from CCNY in New York City who was stirring up the blacks. And then there was a Jewish guy whose name I can't remember now.
CCNY, translate.
City College of New York.
Oh, okay, thanks.
I went to one of them, so.
So that they got polarized. The people in our workshop created an action plan that built channels of communication all over the campus. They followed that plan and healed those problems. Today that university is thriving. So it's bringing, and for the conservatives, the liberals were going over and hugging them at the end. So it's the importance of putting everybody together and being able to do it by listening and not giving up. And so these are complicated ideas. It's a whole new paradigm. So I am, and I'm not kidding, and anybody who knows me will tell you I'm not. I am available to each and every one of you whenever you have a question. It can be a personal family one, or it can be a bigger one, whatever. I have dedicated my life to these ideas and actions, and I have put my life on the line more times than I would like to admit. So.
Thank you.
A very different group from what I'm used to.
I have some information that I've come up since last week's session. The Heritage Foundation, which is a Christian nationalist group, has something they call Project 2025. A couple of things that they, this is from an article in The Guardian, which references a film called Bad Faith. The article is called Demolishing Democracy. The Project 2025 has a couple of big points. They really want to get Trump reelected. And they have a couple of what they call day one objectives. One of which is that on day one, Trump would institute the Insurrection Act, which has not been updated since 1871. It would allow Trump to basically use the military to arrest anyone who disagrees with him. It would also place independent government agencies like the Justice Department and the FBI under direct presidential control. Therefore, they would no longer be independent. I thought that was very, very telling. I have not watched the film yet, but I've read that it has a very good description about the film and the things that it traces the origins of the Christian national movement in the US. I had a couple of other articles, but unfortunately if they didn't save where I wanted to be, and I can't find it now. So, but those three, that information was all under the same. And the Christian nationalists don't have a problem with the fact that Trump doesn't really fit their Christian mold.
I think he's got a Bible out now.
It says in recent years that Trump, a thrice married profligate cheater with too many character scandals to name, is, if not a true Christian, a divinely sanctioned King Cyrus figure sent to disrupt the secular order. Plus, he is quite in line with a lot of the things that they want to institute. So they're happy with him too.
You know who else? There was an article on him today. Musk is meeting with the dictators around the world.
I didn't hear what you said, Joe.
Elon Musk is meeting with him, buddy with Bolsonaro, Xi, all of the dictators. But what are we looking at? We're looking at what goes next. What values? Do we value democracy? That's one of the discussions that needs to be had. But I would urge you, given the climate out there and the danger, do not head into that with anybody. Because what has happened also is that anybody who is emotionally, mentally unstable, with all the hate that's going out over there, they're becoming even more so. So you listen to people and find out what makes them feel good about whatever their position is. You hear it, so you at least protect yourself and you get new information. But it is very close to all out violence. I can tell you that. I can feel it, having spent years in the Bronx. But I would also say, depending on your behavior, I was there for years and a beacon. I was one of very few white people. And I was never even assaulted, cursed out, or anything. And I was out and about. I was in the shelters and the courts, the schools, the welfare centers. And no problem. So how you position yourself is critical, because we are headed for it. And I will tell everybody I meet that's white, here we go. So keep you listening.
No, my question is, have I just noticed the fear of rising in me? As Beth began to read that. And I'm thinking of individual encounters when that fear begins to come up. How to still be present and ask the questions and be curious. And I don't know if you have any direction.
I haven't thought about that, obviously. As I said, the young white men who were part of the Charlottesville group, they're frightened. You're frightened, but so's everybody else. Okay, that's why, you know, all the people in the Bronx were armed, except me. I couldn't shoot, but it's great to save myself. Of course, for me, I didn't have to. But that's what you do. If you're not scared, you're stupid. Really. And it's true of everybody, like the guy in the leather, big, strong guy. He was terrified. And in my experience, most situations like that, underneath is the fear. Why do people go into groups? Often aliens who have it started in life. Because they're scared. They want to be with like-minded. But the other thing I think that's a danger for our society, I cross the entire social spectrum at a time when most people live in bubbles. So, you know, that's one of the things I wanted to bring in terms of the examples and where I've been and why. And so it's important to know that you don't know. Well, my family certainly didn't, and they didn't want me there either, I can tell you. But you just don't know. When I first got there, I had no idea. I was standing in line behind 3 Puerto Rican women to get their tokens for the subway. They couldn't read and write. I never met anybody who couldn't read and write. You know, and all the other stuff, the danger, the families that look for family therapy, they have to leave somebody home because the apartments weren't safe.
To leave, when the apartments weren't safe to leave open.
They did not have a family member with it all, with all the double locks and, you know, that kind of thing.
So, my understanding is that they're trying to isolate people and cause them to be afraid.
Yeah.
The second that you isolate yourself, you're subject to irrational thoughts. So my way of thinking, I try to associate with people and give love and light to them. And this seems to attract people more than, you know, the sense of them being isolated. When they're isolated, they're fearful. So the more I try to mingle with people and show that the love is there, that the light is there, the less fear there seems to
You
be.
know, that's a good point in the Bronx. I saw that. The way that people came together as a community was extraordinary. They would help, I mean, we were even driving around, my Puerto Rican buddy, in the middle of the night, trying to find a man who got away from the medical facility tour, who had a broken neck. But this was not unusual behavior, you know, that we would go and do what was needed to be done. And when you get to the other piece that I meant to say and didn't, when you get to the level of chaos that we're facing, and a system is rigidified, all ugly behaviors show up. It does not mean that's who the person is. I'm not a Pollyanna. I don't think you tolerate ugly, awful behavior, but you don't want to become a master of the obvious and say, you know, don't beat your child. Nobody I met that didn't know. The problem is they didn't know how not to. So just to know that the ugly behaviors go with all chaotic systems. And until you can find a way to help them move with their families, that's what I do, is to move them as a unit, not save one person, but the whole family, and help them to function differently so that it works better.
Now, I'm familiar with the project and the Heritage Foundation. And I get all this information from my brother because he wants to educate me. Now, on the other side of that, I have my grandson who's 20 years old. He just completed his third year at CSU. And he knows about these things too. They can see Gen Z. Well, I wouldn't have known what Gen Z was unless my grandson, you know, educated me, but that's the current generation Z, and they're terrified. They are petrified, and they're coming together as a community, and this is incredible to me. You see them coming together as a community in small communities, and then it's countrywide. And then I just saw recently that Dublin convinced I can't remember the college there, for them to divest their contributions to Israel. Now, I know a lot of people, and I put myself in that category too, who are not anti-Semitic. No way, no how, never. But we're very in league with the Palestinians. They are being, I'm not gonna use the word crucified, no. But I saw it a long time ago, and it started to enter my head before I said it, genocide. This is a perfect, as far as I'm concerned, a perfect example of genocide. And this is why these kids are raising up, because they see it too. But it's amazing to me how they've come together on that one topic, because they see it as wrong, and it's spreading. So I think that's one example that I hope that as we go forward, we can start building, that kind of social capital. So, and I'm awful. I've said to him, he said, I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know what's gonna happen to me. And I said, well, I really feel sorry for you, because I don't have to worry about it. And who knows for how long? For another 10, 20 years, maybe. And he gets very upset with that.
Can you talk about what you mean by social capital in terms of
Social capital?
in relation to what you were referring to, coming together on this topic?
Okay, well, social capital is the connections that we have, basically. I can say social capital, the connections that we have
In community
in
building.
the community and even wider in the community. And I bet it's interesting, because I started talking to him about social capital because, he's working, he's worked, he didn't come from, but he always had everything. And pretty lucky compared to a lot of other people. But he has a friend, well, not really a friend, sort of an acquaintance, that they agree on a lot of things, but I said to him, you're jealous of this person, because he's got money, he comes from a family, he has a lot of connections, and even connections at CSU. And he said, we all don't have that. And I said, yes, that's very true. I said, let's start building social capital. And I had to start explaining that to him. And so that's what it means. You start one by one by one by one, with whoever you know at any situation. Like right here, how many people in this room are educators? How many people in this room are more favored with having more money than a lot of people do? How many people in this room came from the corporate world? How many, things like that. Every one of those people would be so to know, and like Joe said, listen. And I have a lot of people that are what I call Trumpers. And I listen to them. And some of my friends like that listen to me, and we have a civil discussion. But most of them know. I have other friends that I say, we've agreed to disagree. We don't talk about it. Because we'd end up in a fist fight.
It seems to me though, to take the stance to agree, not to disagree, that you're keeping yourself isolated from one another. And there used to be some kind of meeting, and I'm not hearing the how from you.
That happens, well, I'm telling you, we normally, in the white community, expect a formula. When you get chaos, you can take the formula and flush it down the toilet. it goes nowhere. It's hanging with that person and being patient. Let them be angry too. And to agree, and certainly I did that with my African-American partner. We agreed shortly after I got there that both of us were interested in race relations, race and class. And we agreed to stay our ground no matter what happened. And we did. And part of that story is, our dialogue in my memoir. We went on to develop a kind of relationships. People thought we grew up together. And it was the respect for one another. I've never been madder at anybody in my whole life. I once was ready to throw myself out of the car when we were driving back from New York. And I just thought to myself, well, what if I just let that go? And all of a sudden I felt very peaceful. We can all disagree. That's the world we live in now. There is no possibility. You and I wouldn't agree, especially since I have a big mouth. So it's the ability to stay with it. We can practice it among ourselves here. Take a position that the other person doesn't agree with. What would you?
I just, two small thoughts, and one is looking at our community, and having been a public servant always, I've said many times, we cannot fix Washington, D.C. until we have gone and demanded civility at the HOA and in city council, and then in state government. It has to start here. It's a habit that we have here that we can take and expect civility. I think somebody walking into a city council meeting with wearing some symbol of whatever makes it a big difference. The other thing that I've found, when we keep talking about position, that's a problem. If we focus on position and not what the issue is, we will never get to the issue. Whatever your position is, really is not going to solve till we can agree what is the issue, as you have said.
That's the pattern.
That's the pattern.
You keep expanding, in analysis, you break everything down and you look out at the little pieces and you think that you know something about the big piece. When everything starts to break down, then you end up in crazy talk. That's why we get so many conspiracies. What you do is you take a problem, like I did with Christian nationalism, and you expand your angle of observation to everything that touches it. Then you look for the pattern across all of the pieces and then the underlying structure that sustains it.
What is at the bottom issue? My simple example of that is, and you'll laugh, was mosquito abatement. There were too many mosquitoes in Teton County, Wyoming. And this side said, get that airplane in the air and knock those mosquitoes down with malathion. And this neighbor said, you put that airplane in the air and you're gonna have lawsuits like crazy because of malathion. So we had positions, just anger, furious anger. And what was the issue, I might ask? It was the mosquito. And we did just a very simple larvicide. Nobody had to fly, but once we jettisoned that position, calmed down, and we focused on the issue, it was solved quietly, immediately. Yeah.
It's what we call, when we each have a position, a terminal degree of certainty. We are absolutely certain, beyond all doubt, that we are correct.
And we can't worship that idol, can we?
I hope not.
We're over time, but I expected this. And Joe has said, come to her at any time for questions. As we mentioned at the beginning, this could be a two-part series. There's so much to talk about and engage with. And as we get closer to the election, I'm sure more issues will pop up. So next week, we have Florian Hill leading us in trying to understand what happened in Germany around World War II, and also to talk a little bit more about Bonhoeffer, who started the Confessing Church during that time. And then the final session, I think, will be a lot more opportunity for us to talk like we're doing now, and how do we respond as a community of faith. So thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you.